The most important thing in business is to choose and make the most of everybody in your team. Now, the trouble is we've not understood people correctly. We've not understood what is potential. We've not understood what are limitations and can you get rid of those limitations. I think there's a whole new exciting era of neuroscience coming to the workplace, which CEOs and others can take advantage of, that helps us understand people better, find their hidden potential, get rid of their limitations and so on. So let me explain. We live in a world where the education system doesn't measure the kind of skills needed in the workplace. So in the workplace, you need people who can solve problems, who can feel on top of the situation, who can think outside the box and be innovative and creative. Yet our education system measures in the main the ability to regurgitate what people have been taught. So people emerge from school and college with marks and scores that purport to tell you how intelligent they are. It doesn't. It tells you how good they are at regurgitating in the main. And in the workplace, you need folk who can solve problems. You need people who can be creative, can come up with ideas that nobody else has come up with, so that your strategy, your whole business model is innovative. And of course, at a time when we've got increasing amounts of neurodiversity in the workplace, we've got to find ways of identifying those people and identifying their strengths. So you imagine if you could look at the workforce you've got and say, I've got some brilliant people, but they've got all sorts of limitations. Wouldn't it be great if you could get rid of those limitations, keep the upsides, maybe even enhance the upsides? Well, what we're now learning about neuroscience, and what we're now learning about what gives us those characteristics, those strengths and those limitations, we're learning about how we can re-engineer our cognitive processes. Now, this has come about in the last 20 to 30 years, all sorts of amazing neuroscience that's not reaching the people that need it. So I'm a big fan of AI. But you imagine if you could increase people's natural intelligence. We live with this concept that we have to survive with whatever degree of intelligence we were born with. No, that's not the case. We can do things to increase our mental capacity. And when we increase our mental capacity, we increase our mental strength. We increase the availability of our creativity. And in the workplace, of course, these are incredibly valuable tools. So we tend to not look at what is hidden potential because we've never known how to identify it. Would you imagine if you could look at your whole workforce or look at yourself as an employee and say, wow, I can transform my ability to perform my job. Maybe I can even prepare myself far better for the promotion I've always wanted and not been able to reach. Or maybe in this time of increasing AI, I can make myself ready for change, ready to be retrained, to fit into a world where AI is going to be increasingly important. Where do we start to understand employees' potential? Where do I start to understand my own potential as a business owner or as an employee? Well, first we've got to understand exactly what it is that gives me my attributes, my characteristics. What happens in early childhood is critically important. If I'm a person that was nurtured very nicely and nothing went wrong during pregnancy or my birth or my early years, and everything was calm and smooth, I'll probably be a very consistent, very reliable employee, good at giving attention to detail, be a completer finisher, but I'll probably not be as good at thinking outside the box. I won't be as good at solving problems innovatively. And we know that with neurodiversity, things like ADHD symptoms or even sometimes dyslexia, reading difficulties, often people with that type of limitation are far better at thinking outside of the box, at being creative, at being hyper-focused on doing the most absurd things that other people wouldn't consider doing. And sometimes they come up with brilliant ideas. With that comes lack of attention to detail, not completer finisher, often very poor control on emotions, and so on. And sometimes a lack of ability even to listen for long, and sometimes, not always, a clumsiness in interpersonal skills. All of these things affect the dynamic, affect the performance of the business. And those running the business, they desperately want to maximize every aspect of the performance of every individual so they fit together as a powerful team and create huge success, huge profits for the business. So understanding people is critically important. So we need to get an understanding of what is it that causes these differences in people? What is it that causes neurodiversity? And if we get our heads around that and then study what can I do to identify and then fully develop in a natural way all of the hidden potential, I can take the workforce I've got and get it to a totally different level to wherever I imagined before. And I've seen workforces change like that, where they perform out of their skin. They walk on water for that business because what seemed impossible before becomes possible. Our brains are capable of the most incredible development. We don't have to live with the limitations that we were born with. We can do things to increase the connections in our brain in a fundamental way. To do that, you need neuroplasticity. The only important changes that happen in our brain happens when they're neuroplastic. In other words, when there's stem cells there, when there's the ability to create important, vital new connections. As babies, we do it. We come out of the womb with no ability to do just about anything other than breathe and so on. But as the months go by, we learn to walk and to talk and to develop social skills and eventually sporting skills and so on and so on. All of those things develop, and all of the development happens whilst there's very high levels of neuroplasticity. Well, thanks to neuroscience, we now know how we can create neuroplasticity, that ability to fundamentally change our brains at any age in our lives. You imagine that as a tool in the workforce. How powerful that would be to create the change, the powerful cognitive processing, the increased mental capacity that could increase the effectiveness of every employee. So if you're the employee or if you're the CEO or the business owner, whatever it is, this is crucially important stuff that hasn't generally been known yet. And as we know, the power of people with, say, ADHD, with neurodiversity, is often huge. Some very informed companies for certain roles will, for instance, only take on people with autism. Some in highly creative roles will look for people with dyslexic symptoms. You imagine being able to keep all of those upsides that have been recognized, but reduce or even eliminate some of the downsides that holds them back. So people with autism often have genius knowledge, but maybe they're limited in interpersonal skills or some other aspect that makes them limited to maybe not be managers and so on. Will you imagine keeping the upside and dramatically reducing or even losing the downsides? That's what neuroscience is opening up to us now. So what I see happening is the ability for us to evaluate all of our roles in our companies in a different way, identifying the potential, developing that potential in a natural way, but in a lasting way, and getting far more out of the teams that we have. Getting the teams pulling together better, less insecurity. You know, insecurity and poor control of emotions kills so much innovation in a team. You imagine if you could manage that. Instead of us assuming that's the way he or she is and we have to arrange everything around that fixed set of criteria, we can now look at the criteria and say, to what extent can I change that? Because often we can. To what extent can we get rid of the limitations? Because often we can. And there's programs that we've been working on for a long time now, just perfecting how to develop the very parts of our brain that itself naturally hardwires the rest of the brain. It's a part of the brain called the cerebellum. It's been totally misunderstood. Its role was thought to be just very narrow, to do with balance and coordination, and it's found to be the master coordinator of so many of our cognitive functions as well. When you can develop that cerebellum, that's like the room full of computer coders that gives us all of our skills. When you can develop that, when you can flood the brain with neuroplasticity, and these are all things we can do now, you transform all sorts of things. Is it good for the person concerned? Absolutely. At the human level, it's priceless. Not only are they performing better, they've got more mental capacity, they feel more on top of whatever life or their job is throwing at them. And the implications, of course, for work is huge, huge, at the profit level, at every aspect. Whether they're salespeople or whether they're quality control people or whatever roles we're talking about, you make them better at their job. But one of the big limitations that's become increasingly a problem is stress. You know, I've been working with the police force recently, and I've worked with a number of war veterans recently too. The implications in those roles for stress, and it applies in every job. Stress seems to have got a lot worse. People are having more time off. People are changing their jobs because stress has burnt them out. So the cost to companies, as well as, of course, the huge cost to the individual of stress is enormous. What is stress? Stress is what happens when we run out of mental capacity to deal with whatever we need to deal with, whatever life is throwing at us. And our mental capacity is something that we have assumed is fixed. No, it's not. Mental capacity has been determined by how capable is our cerebellum, that's the brain within the brain, that's the master junction box that links different parts of the brain and different parts of the brain to the body all together. When that is not fully developed, we underperform. When we underperform, our thinking brain is working much harder. And this, just here, this is where we feel overload. This is where we run out of capacity. So the better developed the cerebellum is, the better our fundamental skills are, the more automatic they are, the more natural they are, and the more in the zone we feel when we're doing these things, the more space is freed up here. And this is where we make decisions. And what's needed in the workplace is better decisions. This is where we control our emotions. And what we need in the workplace is better control of our emotions. This is where we can choose what we pay attention to. And of course, that's what completer finishers need, the ability to maintain focus. Now, all of these things, all the evidence is there showing that for some it's hard work, but if you do the right things to develop, to stimulate using carefully chosen exercises, you stimulate the cerebellum, you increase its effectiveness, you increase the precision of the skills that's needed. They become more effortless. You free up mental capacity, you increase mental strength and resilience, and you end up with employees that are more on top. They're working harder, they're achieving more for you, it feels like less work, they're getting less stressed, you're less likely to have to replace them because they're having time off or they've gone for another job that's less stressful, you're burning out less people. So I'm just trying to give you some nuggets of the neuroscience that's out there right now. I've been working on programs for many years now that improves these things at a fundamental level, and it amazes me. The neuroscience from many wonderful establishments around the world is not reaching the workplace yet. I've made it my job to find out about this and put it into programs that can be delivered to individuals to transform their lives, to get their stress levels right down, to get their effectiveness and consistency right up. And whether you're an MD, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're somebody that works for a company, you ought to look into these things. It's taking far too long to get to you, and the difference it can make to your whole life is enormous. And then, of course, we get to aging. We go through our careers, and if we've been highly stressed, we're worn out, and we're looking forward to retirement, and our performance is beginning to dip. Well, we've been doing some research on how we can recover the power and the ability of all of those faculties in older age. In fact, in America, Medicare there's processes where people going through our program can rely on Medicare to cover the cost in many instances. So it's becoming accepted at long last. We can recover our balance. We can recover all of our skills, our memory, our confidence, our ability to be independent. We can recover that even in old age, and that's thrilling. So if you've got a number of employees, or you yourself are getting into your 50s and 60s and you're thinking, oh, I'm not quite as sharp as I was, well, there are things you can do about that too. So there's great hope out there, and thanks to neuroscience, thanks to amazing neuroscientists who've been piecing all of this together, working out how does the brain work, how can it be developed further, how can we get more out of our brain? Well, it's there. It's for real. Check it out.